everyone this afternoon or morning if you're on the West Coast. This is our third year for our year in review, State Policies Impacting CTE, and today we'll be unpacking the 2015 findings of our report. This is a jointly authored paper and also a jointly offered webinar with our great partners at the Association for Career and Technical Education. A little bit about what we are going to talk about, we'll unpack in just a second, but first a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, I didn't even say my name, but I'm Andrea Zimmermann, and I'm the State Policy Associate at the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Education Consortium. And I want to give a huge thanks to our webinar host, Krista, and those folks there at Cisco supporting us today. As she said, if you have any questions regarding the technical aspects of hearing us or anything like that, go ahead and reach to her using that chat feature. And if you have any programmatic questions, and also if you have any questions that come up along the way, because we will be having a Q&A at the end of our, for the last 15 minutes of our webinar. Also, feel free to shoot that into the chat portion as well, and I'll be collecting those. If you have any specific questions that aren't technically related, you can just send it directly to me or to all of our panelists, and we'll be collecting those for our Q&A. Also, the PowerPoint and recording of this webinar will be available and posted both at the careertech.org, that's the NASDCTEc website, as well as ACTE's website. All of those links we'll have at the very end of our webinar, but that's where they will be available. So why don't we go ahead and dig in? So today, like I said, we're going to review our newest report, the 2015 year in review, what those trend lines that we saw in 2015. But now that this is our third year doing this report, we're starting to be able to unpack some very early trend lines since 2013. And finally, since it is officially 2016, and we've seen some governors' state of the addresses, some of the legislative sessions are opening, we're already starting to hopefully get a sense of what we might expect in the coming year. After that, this year we're going to have a new portion of our webinar, which is a deep dive on one particular state's activity last year, and that's our the great state of Colorado, and we have our state CTE director as well as a wonderful state senator from Colorado to be able to help talk about what they did last year in 2015, but more focusing not on the what, but the why and the how. And that'll be a really great addition to our conversation, and I think a great addition also probably to our Q&A section. And then finally, like I said, we will have that Q&A. Go ahead and start sending those as they pop into your head, and I'll be collecting them so we can have a really robust conversation at the end. And as I would like to introduce our panelists, we have Senator Rollie Heath. He's the Colorado senator from the District 18, in Colorado, as well as Dr. Sarah Heath. She's the Assistant Provost of Career and Technical Education at the Colorado Community College System. And we also have Alisha Hyslop, who's the Director of Public Policy at ACTE, and who, again, ACTE co-published this report with us, and then, of course, myself, as I've already introduced myself. So with that, I'm going to actually toss it over to Alisha and let her start to get us on our way. Alisha?
All right. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to everyone who is listening to the webinar today. We hope that you'll be able to use this information to not only identify some of the trends in CTE policy that Andrea mentioned we'd be highlighting, but also to get some ideas of policies that might be useful to address in some way in your own states and communities, or things that could be done to help to strengthen your CTE systems. As Andrea mentioned, this is the third annual report from ACTE and the National Association of State Directors of CTE Consortia. We've been working together to track CTE policy activity since 2013. And this report is unique for our organizations because it focuses solely on state-level activity. Historically, both our organizations had primarily focused on federal activity and relied on, for ACTE, on our state associations, and at NASDCTEc on their state directors actors to handle state policy efforts. But a few years ago, right about the time that we started this effort, we were really in a period of time at the federal level where there were a number of pieces of legislation up for reauthorization, but the congressional gridlock was at an all-time high, and there wasn't a lot of activity at the federal level, or I should say there was a lot of activity, but not a lot of actual legislation being signed or enacted at the federal level related to CTE or education and workforce development more broadly. And so that opened a window for states to really step in and make big changes and have a big impact state policy on what was happening throughout their education and workforce development systems. And we started to see these state-level policies driving what was happening on the ground in CTE programs. And so we thought it was important to get a handle on everything that was happening around the country, how those state-level activities were interfacing with the discussions going on at the federal level. Fast forward and now we have seen some activity at the federal level. You know, in 2014, WIO was finally signed into law. Its reauthorization long overdue. And just in December, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESSA, was signed into law as well. So now we have these new federal policies that are once again helping to drive what's happening at the state. And I think this year, for the first time really in our series, we're really seeing that interplay of federal legislation and state legislation because there finally is some activity at the federal level. But what that's meant is that we're still seeing state activity in response to those federal policies, and I think as we look into 2016, we'll see even more of that going forward. All of that interplay was coupled with a greatly increased interest from state policymakers, like Heath that's on the phone with us today, to leverage CTE for economic and workforce development in their states coming on the heels of the recession and working to rebuild their economies. So there has been a lot of activity around CTE and workforce development legislation, that interest over the last few years. We'll go to the next slide. The other thing we've seen, to put some context around the things that are happening, are a number of state-focused national initiatives. Several national organizations, and we've listed some of them here on the slide for you, have taken it upon themselves to organize efforts to either assist states or to shape state policy efforts around CTE, kind of once again in the absence of federal activity in many cases, or more recently building on federal activity to help these and be implemented. The first one I'll mention is the new J.P. Morgan Chase project that was just announced this week called New Skills for Youth. And approximately 20 to 25 states are going to be awarded planning grants for long-term career readiness education programs aligning with the needs of area employees. And then once those planning grants have been awarded, 10 to 15 states will receive implementation grants of up to $2 million per state over 3 years to implement those demand-driven CTE education programs. And that project is being done in coordination with the Council of Chief State School Officers and the state directors of CTE. So the field is very involved in that project, and it will impact a large number of states going forward. Over the past couple of years, we've seen the chief get involved in other projects as well as the National Governors Association holding policy academies. The Chiefs have done their career readiness initiative where now 17 states are implementing those recommendations. The NGA policy academies, the first one was on aligning education and training, and that touched 14 different states related to integrating their education and workforce, kind of data and partnerships and resources moving forward. And then there's a new NGA policy academy for 6 states focused on work-based learning related to middle skill jobs. So through all of these initiatives, many states have been receive new resources and technical assistance that has often led to state policy conversations to support this work. So that's just a little bit of context as we're thinking about all of the activity going on in states. And that brings us to this year's report, which is called State Policies Impacting CTE 2015 Year in Review. And as Andrea mentioned, the report is available on both of our websites, as will the webinar will be after this presentation. And before we dived into exactly what we found in our report this year, we wanted to talk just a little bit about the methodology that we use to gather all of these state policies. Both of our organizations throughout the year conduct a thorough review of a number of sources, including releases and newsletters from state government agencies, state government websites, media stories, and compilations prepared by other national organizations like the Education Commission of the States on specific topics. And once we have all of those policies compiled, we give both our ACTE State Association leaders and the state directors of CTE an opportunity to review what we found and incorporate any feedback they have into the final report. A couple of notes I should make, though. One is that policy actions were only included in the report if they were finalized in 2015, not merely begun. For example, a piece of legislation might have been passed in 2014 with an enactment date of July of 2015. That policy would have been included in our report last year, even though a state may have dedicated significant resources to its enactment this year. Because it was actually passed in 2014, it would have been included in last year's report. And the same looking forward, policies that are passed in January or approved by state boards in January of 2016 will actually be in our report next year, not in the one that was released today. The other note I should make is that this is a comprehensive overview, and while many of the policies, and certainly many of the ones we'll highlight, have positive implications for CTE, we will include all policies, even ones that might have negative implications for CTE. So the inclusion of a specific piece of legislation or bill in this report doesn't signify endorsement by ACT, the state directors, or any of the state CTE leaders in that particular state. This is merely a compilation and a resource that we hope will be valuable to people looking for an overview of CTE policy. So we did find a large number of policies that were enacted. Over 125 individual bills or state board rules or other pieces of state policy were passed or released in 2015 across 39 states. So of states have policies enacted this year. Those came from state legislatures, state boards of education, official agency action, and executive orders, so a wide range of policies there. This number is important to note is slightly fewer overall than the numbers we found last year related to the number of policies introduced, but we did see an uptick in substantive activities. So there were more comprehensive bills or executive orders, even though there were slightly fewer overall pieces of legislation or state policy. This might be because of a couple of reasons. One, states who did more substantive work might have combined things into fewer pieces of legislation. But we know a number of states were focused on implementing major state and federal policies that had been passed in recent years rather than adopting those new reforms. And a number of states also had pretty high-profile budgetary battles this year, leading to some delayed action on a range of other policy issues. But we think this line is still showing a substantial interest in CTE at the state level, and a large number of substantive policies. At this point, Andrea is going to start digging into the specific types of policies we found and where we found them.
Alisha, and thanks so much for that great overview and background. So here's what I'm showing you now. This is our policy table that you can find in our 2015 report, and I'll just pause to say again that you'll be able to find the report, the PowerPoint, and the webinar all on either the ACTE website or the NASDCTEc website, and all of it will be available. The report is currently available. The webinar recording, just give us a few hours to get that posted, but we will. So back to the policy table itself. What you're looking at here is the major policy areas and the corresponding states that had activity in those areas. So for a couple of, first of all, you can imagine that a single bill might cover several categories, and so these are duplicated counts that you're looking at. So, for example, one of the pieces of legislation I believe we'll touch on, we won't touch on today, but is an important one that I wanted to highlight, is Georgia's Senate Bill 132, which streamlines the state's dual enrollment initiatives. And in that piece of legislation, it touches on funding, dual enrollment, industry-recognized credentials, and graduation requirements. And so, thus, they would be, counted in each of those categories in this table. Additionally, down at the bottom, one of the smaller categories, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, there's a technical note here as well, is to say that we define STEM legislation as those laws and policies that reference the activity explicitly as science, technology, engineering, and math. And so if that STEM terminology was not present, however, it might be a bill about manufacturing, career awareness, one could argue that is also STEM related. However, for the purposes of this report, it was counted in STEM. So just things that I want to dig into is with our funding category. This is, for the third year in a row, our top category. And so in 2015, we had 28 states passing bills affecting CTE funding, and it was consistent with our 2013 and 14 reports. But also, we really saw that what's showing us is that, states are not only paying attention to CTE through policy and rhetoric, but also through their pocketbooks, and that matters. And funding can really come in many forms. It could be core appropriations, it could be grant programs, student scholarships, it could also be pilot programs to try and test and support some new and innovative ideas. And so, let's see here, there were 28 states, and just want to step through a couple of highlights here. Again, this is not exhaustive, but we saw an interesting secondary, post-secondary split here. So on the post-secondary side, part of the trend we were seeing was very much something that started in 2014 with Tennessee and their Tennessee Promise, with a last dollar scholarships to essentially provide free community college. So Oregon this year followed that trend, and Minnesota, the legislature authorized a pilot test of that same idea. Additionally, Tennessee this year built upon their Tennessee Promise sort of to also reconnect adult learners into the education system, as well as veterans. On the secondary side, we saw some really interesting activity as well. For example, and also Montana, saw major increases in their own core state funding. And in fact, in Montana, they did an assessment of CTE funding in all of their neighboring states and realized that their K-12 CTE funding was far below what it was in their neighboring states. And they were able to double their CTE funding this year. Another state that has now had yet another year of CTE investment came from California. Of course, they're always kind of an outlier because their economy is just so large. But it was another year and another major investment from them. And this time it was in the form of a competitive grant program called the CTE Incentive Grant to support new or expanded high-quality CTE programs. And the grant will cover $900 million over the next 3 years. Some of you who are probably from state legislatures and departments of education are probably trying to wrap your head around having that much money for CTE, but certainly something that's very interesting in that continued investment. Conversely, we do have to make a few notes of some funding decreases we saw this year. And one of those came in Arizona with the reduction of the state's per pupil spending to 92.5%, which was a total of $26 million, to the state's 14 joint technical education districts. These are like their area technical centers, essentially. And also in Kansas, back in 2012, the legislature and governor supported an Excel and CTE initiative that also last year got an additional infusion of cash because of the wild popularity of the program within K-12 CTE. However, this year, in the face of tight financial situations, the incentive funding connected to that program to school districts for students obtaining industry certifications was cut, and that was again because they didn't want to hurt the students and in recognizing kind of those financial difficulties. And so when they did an analysis of which industry certifications the testing was being done, et cetera, this is how they made that calibration. And so those are just a couple of the funding examples. And Alisha, I'm going to toss it back to you to talk a little bit about our second most popular category, governance.
Okay, so similar to our report in 2013, this governance category kind of reemerged this year as the second most common policy area. And we had 21 states enacting laws or rules to affect how CTE was governed in some way. And we included several different types of policies in this category. Funding formula changes that were not so much about the amount of money, but about how or who distributed the dollars. The creation of new governing bodies or task forces, transfer of authority from one state agency to another, as well as mandates or changes in how interagency collaboration occurs at the state level. So all of those things were included in our governance category. And on the next slide, we will talk through a few of those examples, some highlights of those different kinds of governance changes. One of the most prevalent this year was a transfer of authority from one agency to another, or the creation of a new agency in some cases. For example, in Alabama, Senate Bill 191 separated the state's community and technical colleges from the jurisdiction of its Department of Education and created a new independent Alabama community college system and a new board of trustees. And we saw this in a couple of states, similar activity. Another example was in Arkansas. There was a major reorganization of how CTE and workforce development operate. Senate Bill 338 established the Career Education and Workforce Development Board to create and administer a more coordinated approach to workforce development and CTE. Has created the Skills Development Fund and Office of Skills Development to help provide resources and oversee resources for the development and implementation of workforce training programs. And then finally in South Dakota, House Bill 1118 changed the governance of the state's technical institutes from oversight by the school districts to independent oversight. So similar in some way to what happened in Alabama, but more focused on local governance. Each institution is going to be eligible to become its own separate local education agency with its own independent governing board. And there's also related legislation in South Dakota to amend the state's constitution to separate the governance of the technical institutes from the Board of Regents. That all still has to be approved by voters in 2016, though. So definitely transfer of authority was a big theme this year. And one of the other things that we mentioned in the governance category was a stronger focus on interagency collaboration and changes to legislation that would directly address that issue. In Virginia, the bill, House Bill 1335, that directed the appointment of liaisons between the state's Department of Education and the State Board for Community Colleges. And then another bill that requires each of the agencies administering CTE and workforce development to go some new reporting requirements, as as well as to collaborate on relative roles and responsibilities, and for each local workforce development board to develop and execute strategic plans designed to combine public and private resources across funding streams to support sector strategies, career pathways, and career readiness skills development. And that kind of leads into some of these other states. We saw a lot of focus on these sector strategies and career pathways, as well as policies like the ones passed in Arkansas, California, and Florida, and Louisiana related to the implementation of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. As states went through the initial planning for that federal legislation that was enacted in 2014, we saw a number of policies either connected to sector strategies and career pathways like in Virginia, or specific to CTE's involvement like these 4 states. And I think as WOA implementation continues, this is probably a trend we'll continue to see more of moving forward. Next category was in partnerships and work-based learning. That was the 3rd highest number of states in that policy area with 20. And these policies ranged from business advisory boards and liaisons to that work-based learning that I mentioned. In fact, about a third of the states included in this category had policies specifically focused on expanding or improving work-based learning at either the secondary and or post-secondary levels through things like funding increases, accountability metrics, tax incentives, and more. And I think in this category in particular, we saw a lot of crossover with the funding category, because many of these initiatives, particularly the work-based learning ones, required some new funding to incentivize or implement the new programs and changes there. The first few examples, I'm going to focus on the area of collaboration and highlight things that happened in 3 states, Arkansas, Texas, and Oregon. In Arkansas, Senate Bill 891 created the Workforce Initiative Act of 2015 fund to provide planning and implementation grants to support the development of local career pathways, so that theme again. But these grants in particular encourage collaboration between employers and the education sector and had that as a specific focus. In Texas, House Bill 1431 directed the State Board of Education in consultation with the Commissioner of Higher Education as well as other business and industry leaders to develop a career-oriented foreign language program that public schools can use to provide students in CTE with interest in foreign language terminology. And then in Oregon, House Bill 2728 established the Oregon Talent Council to advise state agencies and educational institutions about talent development in high-growth industries. It replaced some earlier activities in that regard, and the plan is to populate that council primarily with industry representatives that have more and give it more flexibility to fund innovative programs and meet workforce needs. On the work-based learning side of industry partnerships, we saw a number of state activities. In Colorado and Virginia, there were new policies to provide reimbursement and other incentives to sponsoring employers for internships and apprenticeships to hopefully increase the number of students that have access to those programs and the number of slots that are available for students. Maryland enacted a pilot program to connect K-12 and apprenticeships. It's called the Apprenticeship Maryland Pilot Program, House Bill 942. It's a 2-year program to allow high school juniors and seniors to obtain a license or certification in high-skill, high-growth manufacturing and STEM sectors, working with local school systems to pilot and our 1 year of classroom instruction as well as paid work-based training with eligible partner employers. So it's an extensive pilot project being under that law. And then in New Mexico, this is a policy that addressed their high school graduation requirements and amended the public school code to award credit for CTE and pre-apprenticeship programs, as well as to allow districts to put additional weight on students' GPAs for students who successfully complete industry-recognized credentials. So you can see lots of diversity in the policies in this category related to industry partnerships. We thought it was also important to note here that most of these policies are really aimed to strike a balance between the education and the workforce side of CTE. These pilot programs like the one in Maryland that incorporate classroom instruction and broader education with paid work experience. The idea in Texas of offering a foreign language program that would really be useful across career areas, no matter what specific occupation a student entered, but would help to meet a business and industry need, are all kind of examples of balancing a student's kind of long-term career trajectory within their CTE program with the immediate needs of business and industry, which is often something that the system and the workforce development system are working to balance moving forward. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andrea for the next section.
All right, thanks so much. And this will be the last of the categories that we walk through today, and then we'll be pivoting to our folks in Colorado. But before we do that, we wanted to talk about the fourth most popular category in terms of activity, which was career and academic guidance and awareness. And this category is actually our biggest jump this year. In fact, in the previous 2 years, in 2013 and 14, it ranked 11th overall, and in 2014 there were 6 states with activity, and in 2013 there were 3 states, whereas this year you see there were 15 states. And that is notable, and it's one of those, Alisha and I talked through this this week, and we were wondering, well, is it because this is reflective of what we're seeing as a national trend, et cetera, in the conversation? Is it a chicken or the egg? You know, we're not really sure without kind of some deeper analysis, but the simple fact is this is in line with a lot of what you are hearing in the chattering when it comes to talking about how best to expose students to the variety of careers and career paths available to them, and how to make sure they're making informed decisions. So you could see this in a lot of different ways. It included the funding of career planning tools. Oh, jump ahead, I'm sorry. Career planning tools in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, but it also could include in Alabama and Arkansas, for example, the number and training of career counselors. Additionally, we also saw that in Utah as well. And also notably in Nebraska and Michigan, the governors there got involved in this too and launched career awareness, campaigns to help promote a variety of careers and high-demand industries. And additionally, Tennessee also kind of got into this as well at the middle school level with STEM, and also expanding that to outside of just the science classroom, which allows the opportunity for CTE also be certainly involved there. And so with that, I want to quickly do a little bit of a comparison and then try to be a predictor as much as possible. So we have our, again, 3 years of reports now. It's just enough data I'm willing to start looking and saying, hey, do we have any trends here? And these are early, mind you, but all the same. And so in this table, we have the rank in terms of the category. So remember we said funding was our top category for all 3 years, and so you can see it was the first category listed there. In 2013, that was that interesting swing we saw with governance being the second most popular category, and then this swing last year to it being one of the last categories in terms of activity, and then back up to the top again this year. And I think that that's a natural kind of ebb and flow when you think of administration, et cetera. And then the industry partnerships and work-based, we're just continuing to there's an error on that screen. If you've been paying attention, oh no, it is right. Never mind. excuse me, but so in our 2013 report, it was our seventh most common category, and in this year, it was our third most common category. And you can kind of see that climb. And then, again, that career awareness piece and the big jump that it made this year, quite a leapfrog. And then finally, dual and concurrent enrollment, articulation, early college, all of those sorts of post-secondary enrollment options for K-12 students continues to be an area of a lot of interest and support. And you can certainly see that, and even though it took a little bit of a dip this year, I think it's still very consistent with what we've seen across the years. Only something that's not on here, but we did see this year greater focus on CTE teacher certification and professional development. I think this is in line with what we have we're seeing both last year and this year with teachers and the profession of teaching more broadly beyond just CTE, in terms of there being a lot of focus in states about how to recruit and retain teachers, et cetera. And so also, just to bump ahead here to, not to Colorado yet, but to our State of the State addresses. So as of the end of today, so this is assuming they all have their speeches by the end of today, 25 governors will have given their State of the State addresses. And these are sort of a traditional speech that governors usually give just about every year to either open up other states' legislative session or sometime pretty early on, that helps to illustrate the governor's priorities for the year. Often this will kind of give a hint to what we might expect to see in terms of legislative activity. Also, it can just be a really great bully pulpit, so to speak, and chance for really important issues to be spotlighted by such a high-profile person, and of course bringing awareness to those important issues such as CTE. And so this year there were just two addresses that I want to spend a little bit of time on today. That the Virginia governor spent a large part of his speech just a couple weeks ago, talking about how to transform the Commonwealth's education and workforce development systems. And all of this it ranged from the entrepreneurship, hands-on learning, early college courses, industry credentials, but really it focused around that idea of fostering regional collaboration among government, businesses, and education. Also, he spent on talking about the need for a K-12 competency-based education system. Similarly, in Idaho, Governor Otter also talked about that competency-based approach for K-12, as well as some CTE-related funding at the post-secondary and secondary levels. And so with that, I would turn it over to you to talk about everything going on there in Colorado.
All right, well, thank you, Andrea. As Andrea said, my name is Heath, and I am our State Director for Career and Technical Education here in Colorado, and I've actually only been the State Director since July. So many of the elements of Colorado's success is highlighted in this report is due to previous leadership here in our office, as well as our CTE team here, as well as our Colorado Association for Career and Technical Education and other supporters of sister agencies. If we didn't have those partnerships and a united voice for career and technical education, many of the bills that you saw or you will see in the report, and the ones I'll highlight, as well as partnerships, we just wouldn't be able to get as much done. So that's one of the definite low-hanging fruit items I would suggest to anyone on the call, is just talking and having those collaborative conversations with your sister agencies, but then also your associations and nonprofits within your state that really care about career development as well as economic development. Colorado CTE administration and leadership is unique in that K-12 as well as post-secondary CTE are both led through the Colorado Community College system. As you can see from my title, I'm the Assistant Provost for Career and Technical Education at the Colorado Community College system. This unique partnership and connection between K-12 and CTE at the post-secondary level allows for pathway planning and CTE alignment for a seamless transition for students. We all know that students are our number one priority in education, regardless of what level you're at. We serve roughly 96,000 students in K-12 and 51,000 in post-secondary. So, our governor established a blueprint for economic development, which reflects education and training as a key element, especially in our Colorado key sector areas in the development of a unique pathway for those program areas. Because of this vision, career and technical education has had strong support from all of our state agencies as well as nonprofits and their stakeholders. Colorado Workforce Development Council and their leadership, Steve Beck, has been core conveners for workforce priorities as it relates to education and training. Without their partnership, this would have come to light, and their continued support to ensure that all Coloradans have meaningful employment. Career pathways have been established through this past legislative session in information technology, care, and construction. In past legislation, we also had a focus on manufacturing that established career pathways in manufacturing, and I'm really excited that later you'll hear from Senator Heath, as this is one of his passion areas in manufacturing. The Pathways initiatives in Colorado showcase CTE as an educational model that has a high return on investment, not only for our students, but then also for our employers and the growth and future of Colorado. Citizens, especially business and industry professionals, are exceptionally supportive of career and technical education as an economic development tool, and other policymakers know this importance. Policymakers have supported these initiatives in the past legislative session in what's dubbed our Colorado Ready to Work package. The package showcased many elements of career and technical education and brought them further into the policymakers and public attention. The elements were, as mentioned before, with learning opportunities such as pre-apprenticeship and internship, enrollment credits for students within a pathway, post-secondary workforce readiness initiatives. For learning, House Bill 1270 school districts to connect students and work-based learning experiences to college credits through concurrent enrollment. While it's been an option for CTE pathways, it is now elevated, and we hope to see a growth in credits earned by students, as well as an increase in the quality of programming, such as the pieces of teacher and employment supervision students, as well as the coaching through the work experiences for students, so that they grow that post-secondary workforce readiness skill. And then Colorado policymakers also passed House Bill 1570, which is Pathways in Technology for Early College High Schools, or PTEC. Those schools were just recently announced, which is very exciting. Will allow students to have access to quality career and technical education-related pathways in our STEM areas with a high focus on information technology as some of the areas of growth within our state within construction. And so earn concurrent enrollment credit as well as work-based learning experiences for an additional 2 years in hopes that they will complete their either AAS or AA or AF and in employment with that partnering business. Most technical education centers already operate in this way, but are only funded for students until 12th grade. So what we're hoping is that this model will increase the completion rate for students, which will also increase some of our completion initiatives that we have for students within our state. We feel fortunate that these experiences are being created for students in Colorado. Additionally, 2 bills that will be providing funding for training programs. 76, the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment was granted $3.3 per year to fund matching grants from public and private providers of qualified skilled work training programs, such as our community college CTE programs and also our non-credit side of the house. The goal of this grant is to increase the completion of quality programming that leads a job seeker to a valuable and quality credential that can help them become employed, and hopefully will be stackable in nature. So we had 1271, in which state funds will be used to create mobile learning labs, and this is modeled after a wonderful program that Pueblo Community College has, and will provide employers the access for on-skills, on-site training. And past Pueblo Community College used this center to provide access and interest-peaking lessons to rural middle school and high school students. So we see a great connection there between what employers need to come on site and train their employees, as well as taking interest in students to really understand what the pathways have to offer. All the resources that CTE students, educators, and employers now have access to in Colorado would not be possible without a policymaker who is a champion for workforce skills. Senator Rollie Heath, no relation in case you were wondering, at least that we know of, was senator-sponsored nearly every bill that I've mentioned in this package. Senator represents Colorado District 18, and he is a dynamic and completely in touch advocate for our programs. We're so fortunate to have him serve Colorado. It's my honor to turn the program over to Senator Rollie Heath to further discuss why he has championed this area, and then also more information on the bills and intents that policymakers have to support workforce development. Thank you so much, Senator Heath, for joining us today.
And thank you all for allowing me to participate in this webinar. And it's unusual to share it with another Heath, and although I don't think we related, it's a pleasure to have another Heath, as I said. So I'd give you just a little background. I got involved in this, and let me just go back a few years, more than a few years, I guess. I had the privilege of serving the United States Army in Germany from 1965 to 68. The Army sent my wife and me to language school in Monterey, California, to study them before I went there, which gave me a huge one-up in terms of really integrating myself and understanding the German school program. As Sarah mentioned, I've spent most of my career in manufacturing, actually more than 40 years, going back to 1970 when I came to Colorado. During that period, I worked for a company called Zimmermann, and I had 100 plants and mines reporting to me from around the world. But I got, as I said, view so much of this firsthand. We had identical plants in Germany and Ohio, identical plants, 40 apprentices in Germany, none in Ohio. That wouldn't surprise anybody back in the 70s. But I think it likes where we were in this country, where we are at that time. Having jobs in Manville, I started a machine shop with a couple of partners in 90, and virtually all the employees we hired as machinists, welders, tool makers, all educated outside of this country. And it got me to exploring the whys and wherefores of this, and obviously which resulted in me involved in career technical education. That goes to the essence for me. I came to the conclusion that rather than having either or, a 4-year college education or a technical education, we had as a culture created basically an all or nothing, a 4-year college degree or nothing from a post-secondary standpoint. And I think this created so much of we lacking in people to go in career and technical education. And it really got me involved. I coached for the Denver Public Schools, the Denver Career Partnership. I co-founded a program at Manual High School, which was less than a mile from my plant. Which program we recruited 250 people like myself. Had one of us for every 4 students at Manual, and I did that for 4 years before I was governor. And the whole length of that was to make sure that the students understood that opportunities out there for them, but only if they graduated from high school and only if they did some post-secondary education. It's a real eye-opener for that whole program. I chaired the City of Denver's first Workforce Summit, and I chaired the Denver Workforce Development Board. So at the time that I was elected to the state senate, a lot of background in this area, which lead to take on running is that I was appointed to the Select Committee on Job Creation and Economic Growth before I was even sworn in January 2009. And as all of us recall all too vividly, 2009 was really the peak point of the recession, and that Select Committee, from our standpoint, was absolutely critical. One of the most significant bills that came out of that session in that committee and that we passed into was the one on concurrent enrollment. and this was something called the ACTE program, which stands for Accelerating Students Through Concurrent Enrollment. And this program allowed students to spend an extra year in high school at no expense to them and earn an associate's degree at the end of that year. Companion bill which I sponsored to that included career and technical education as a critical part of the concurrent program. As you heard from Sarah, 2015 really was a high point for all of this as we passed the Ready to Work package. And just to give you a little sense of this, I've been the majority leader of the Senate, and then the Democrat lost the majority and became the minority leader. But working with the leadership, the new Senate Republican leadership in the House, which was Democratic, but we literally put the leadership in the House and the Senate, both parties together in the first week of that 2015 session, and we all agreed that we would work to pass what the Colorado Ready to Work package, which was 8 bills. Sarah highlighted some of them. I'm going to talk a little more in depth about some of them. We passed those 8 bills in the last couple of weeks of session. And as was earlier, the state of the state, the governor highlighted what we had done together in a bipartisan way, his state of the state message, and said that we would continue to work there in 2016 to some of the bills that we passed. I'll give you just a little sense of the success we've had with concurrent enrollment in this state. Right now, at the end of the last time we had statistics, the 2013-14 school year, had over 1,000 students enrolled in various school enrollment programs in the state. It represents a quarter of all the 11th and 12th graders. More than 950 students were enrolled in the ACTE program, which I mentioned to you. 84% of our school districts, 80% of our high schools offer concurrent enrollment programs. And again, in the last year that we had statistics, concurrent enrollment was up 15% in 2013-14, enrollment 43%. And although we don't have the statistics for the 14-15 school year, I know they were up substantially as well. And another important factor for me anyway, and I would hope for all of us, is that nearly half of the students participated in ACTE. We're a group, as we know, has been historically underrepresented in post-secondary and education. And I think that's critical in closing the achievement gap, and I really do think all of the effort we're putting into this area will have a significant impact on something that we all recognize as important to do with. As part of all of this, Sarah talked about our career pathways, and in 2013, and I guess it's my bias, and I alluded to this, manufacturing background, it was the first career pathways, and I was told this week that we have now 56 separate pathways in manufacturing representing all of the various disciplines that manufacturing has, and as Sarah said, we've now added construction, IT, and healthcare to those pathways. So in 2015, we took workforce and CTE to a whole new level with the Colorado Ready to Work package. And I've already mentioned concurrent enrollment career pathways. Sarah alluded to these, but we also added apprenticeship and internships to concurrent enrollment. We've been over 3 years for outreach and recruitment. Old words, this all or nothing culture in our society. We asked the companies established apprenticeship and internship opportunities. And that hasn't been mentioned, but I think were critical and maybe most impactful policy change that we made. Quote from House Bill 151170. I was one of the prime sponsors of it in the Senate. which simply says this. Beginning in the 2016-17 school year, each high school will report the percentage of students in the public high school who, in the school year immediately following graduation from high school, enroll in a career and technical education program, community college, or for an institution of higher education. And here is the most important part of it. But then, show each secondary enrollment option equally into public high school's level of attainment of this measure. Not those going to a four-year college, but equally with those going into post-secondary option, career and technical education, and so forth. So it's like the adage, you only do what you admit, what is yours. And first time now, we have put on an equal level, go on to post-secondary education, not just to a four-year college, but to a community college and to a career and technical education, technical post-secondary training. So I think this, with anything we could possibly have done, now legally, and hopefully from a society standpoint, we can say goodbye to all or nothing and truly have an either or. So thanks for letting me share my personal experiences and the Colorado story with you. It's one that we're all very, very proud of, and thank you for, again, allowing me to share this with you this webinar.
Thank you so much, Senator. And we actually have just about run out of time, so instead of the question I was going to ask you about 2016, I just want to say thank you for speaking our language of talking about really valuing college and career readiness. If we say college and career, let's really mean it. That's something that we certainly talk about here in the CTE community all the time. And so with that, I'm actually going to have to skip our Q&A. However, that said, we are going to have email addresses at the very end of the slide. So if you have any questions you'd like to direct to the Senator or to Sarah or myself or Alisha, please do so. But first, one of the questions we did get is about where can I find, and then where you can find our paper, our webinar recording, our webinar slides. It's going to be at both careertech.org or acteonline.org sites. They're there for the taking, whichever one you'd like. They'll both be available and ready. The paper is currently available. The webinar recording will be up shortly. Also, next month is CTE month. Be thinking about all the ways in which you can maybe visit your state senators to talk about how great CTE is. Additionally, here at NASDCTEc, we will be featuring events happening around the country, so if you have something great going on, tell us about it. Send an email to Katie Fitzgerald. Additionally, thank you so much, Krista, for all of your wonderful technical help, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists who joined us today. And we thank all of you participants for tuning in, and please have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.